is AM Agenda with Kieran Gilbert.
Good morning and welcome to the program. First today to the debacle in Victoria that's seen the new Andrews government fork out hundreds of millions of dollars to cancel all contracts relating to Melbourne's East-West link. Coming up a bit later this morning, Kelly O'Dwyer and Jim Chalmers to discuss those and other matters. First though to the Victorian opposition leader Matthew Guy, who joins me from Melbourne. Mr Guy, thanks very much for your time. Does your side of politics accept at least some of the accountability here, given the contracts were signed so late in the piece, and in fact the former Napthine government shoveled out hundreds of millions of dollars in the final days, the final weeks of the coalition government in Victoria?
We certainly did not, and more the point that what we accept responsibility for is making sure that Melbourne, the fastest growing city in Australia, has an appropriate infrastructure agenda for a city of 4.5 million people. I mean, what we have in Victoria now is a capital city in Melbourne, population 4.5 million, which has an infrastructure agenda smaller than that of Darwin. It is completely unacceptable. Melbourne needs new infrastructure, road, rail and port. What we're getting from the Andrews Labor government is spin and lies and excuses, cancelling the biggest road project in Australia in the fastest growing city.
The former government knew this was a divisive project. You went ahead with it in the closing days of your government. You knew this was contentious.
Well, in fact, that's factually just not correct. I mean, in fact, it was announced in the May 2013 budget, which is 18 months before the previous election.
When were the contracts signed?
I mean, no one said that the Gillard government didn't have legitimacy in Gonski. No one said the Bracks government didn't have legitimacy in the East-West Link, or the D-Cell, or Mikey, or the North-South Pipeline. I mean, the argument that governments shouldn't sign contracts because they're not in caretaker mode is actually quite ridiculous. We signed a contract that is for the best interests of the state. It's been recklessly it was signed about 2 months before the election. It's been recklessly cancelled by a government with nothing to replace it with.
So 2 months before the election, you knew that the opposition was opposed to it, went ahead with it, and now screaming that they've cancelled it.
Can you tell me another example in Australian politics where a government has ceased governing because the opposition parties have opposed an infrastructure project that they've gone ahead with?
If you're talking about a $7 billion project, maybe you should have set the precedent.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. As I said, I don't think you can name one. That's because the premise of the question to say that governments shouldn't go ahead with infrastructure on a mandate that they have is actually ridiculous. We announced it in the May 2013 budget. It's a good project. It's a very important project for Melbourne. We're the fastest growing city in Australia and we need this project. The fact it's been scrapped at a cost of nearly $1 billion to Victorian taxpayers beggars belief. No one sitting in traffic this morning in the Eastern Freeway in Melbourne will think that it's been a good idea to scrap the East-West Link.
Okay, so what do you say to the government's suggestion that the real price of this project, Tim Pallas, the Treasurer yesterday releasing some numbers from his head of Treasury, saying that the real cost was going to be $10.7 billion, not the $6.8 billion that had been previously suggested?
If you believe Tim Pallas, you may as well believe that the world is flat. I mean, the reality is, when you buy a house, you buy it at the amount that it is. You don't say, well, in 20 years' time, it's going to be valued at point X. And the East-West Link, what the government's trying to do is saying in 20 years' time it will have cost point X. It's a ridiculous argument. The value of the contract is $6 to $7 billion. It's the right project to go ahead with. It was fully funded. And Kieran, Melbourne now has a smaller infrastructure agenda than Darwin. This is ridiculous. We're the fastest growing city in Australia. This city needs new infrastructure, road, rail and port. We have the government of the day saying that they'll build the Metro Tunnel. That won't begin for 5 to 6 years. And of course, they've scrapped the Port of Hastings, the airport rail link, now the East-West Link. It is not good enough for the fastest growing city in Australia not to have a clear and set out infrastructure agenda, a pipeline of jobs and employment. But that's what Labor's left us with here in Victoria today.
Mr. Guy, I appreciate your time this morning. Thanks very much. And with me now we have Liberal frontbencher Kelly O'Dwyer joining me live from Melbourne and Labor frontbencher Jim Chalmers. Kelly, first to you on this story. Now, there's been a lot of talk about the issue of sovereign risk and so on, but I want to put to you the reaction from both the Spanish authorities. The Spanish ambassador welcomes this deal done, a compromise by Daniel Andrews, as does the French ambassador, saying, to my mind, the outcome is good news for Victoria, good for Australia, and for the business relationship between France and Australia. Of course, the French and Spanish companies, key parts of the consortium. So overall, Andrews has come up with a decent compromise given this divisive situation, hasn't he?
Well, what he's come up with is ripping up a contract that was signed to deliver vital infrastructure that Victoria needs at a cost to more than 7,000 jobs and around a cost of $1 billion that we are aware of, although we are still trying to add up all of the figures. It's still unclear exactly how much has been spent on not building a road in Victoria. But let me say this, I mean, this government has introduced for the first time the idea of sovereign risk. We are now being compared with countries like Venezuela because of the decisions made by the Andrews government. We are overseas at the moment, and the Treasurer is overseas at the moment with the World Bank and the IMF, and he is signing deals, signing memorandums of understanding for our global infrastructure hub. This was the project that we led at the G20, which will be based in Sydney. Now, when you have Australia being talked about as a sovereign risk country by virtue of what the Andrews government has done in Victoria, it is a disgrace. It is a disgrace for those people who are going to bear the cost of that, and that is Victorian taxpayers.
Jim Chalmers, your reaction to that, and I guess the point that's been made is that it would be hard to see a federal Labor Party with Chris Bowen, yourself and others included, ripping up a contract, cancelling a contract of this sort if after an election. What's your take on all of this? Of course, from Brisbane, but you know you'd be well aware of this very controversial issue down south.
Yeah, of course. I think Daniel Andrews is to be commended for following through on an election promise. The reason this is so unfamiliar to Kelly is because the federal Liberals haven't done a good job on following through on the commitments that they made the Australian people. But Daniel Andrews made this commitment. As you said in your question to Kelly, this is an outcome that has been achieved with substantial negotiation and discussion. People are generally happy about the outcome, and Daniel Andrews has other ways to ease congestion on Melbourne roads.
Let's move on to some other issues now. Kelly O'Dwyer, your Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer. Mr Hockey says that the feedback from Wall Street, from Standard & Poor's and others, that they welcome, accept at least, Australia's slower trajectory to surplus. Is that basically just the reality that we've got to deal with? And I guess not everyone's happy with this pace. Certainly many in the business community think the government should be putting the foot down a bit quicker in terms of reform here.
Well, certainly we have passed through the Senate more than $30 billion worth of savings. A number of those savings, though, that we have tried to get through the Senate have been held up deliberately by the Labor Party. $5 billion worth, of course, that the Labor Party themselves introduced when they were last in government, or spoke about introducing when they were last in government, and yet politically now they're trying to obstruct. Obviously, we would like to be able to deliver a surplus sooner by cutting spending and by getting the budget back under control. That is something we are trying to do. We have been thwarted by the Labor Party, who are not an honest partner in trying to get the future of Australia back on track. Now, I understand why the Labor Party doesn't want to be part of the solution, because they were very much part of creating the problem here. But they do have a responsibility for future generations of Australians to help fix the mess that they created.
Do you, Jim Chalmers, welcome the fact that Standard & Poor's still, according to Mr Hockey, sees Australia as structurally in good shape, a good place? And I guess you'd feel some empathy for him given the ever-falling price of iron ore, given you, when you're working with the former Treasurer, has faced a similar situation with the declining mining boom.
Oh, well, there are a lot of issues in that question, Kieran. I think Kelly's got a lot of nerve talking about honesty, given it's the dishonesty and chaos and confusion on the Liberal side that's smashing consumer confidence and flowing through into the unemployment rate. That's the first point. But when it comes to the ratings agencies, one of the proudest achievements of the former Labor government was that for the first time in our history, Australia had a AAA credit rating from all three of the big ratings agencies. That had never ever happened before, not under Costello, not under any of our predecessors. So that's another important point. It is true that the ratings agencies look at trajectories. It is true that the ratings agencies generally take a favourable view of the Australian fiscal position, and that we do need to demonstrate over time a responsible and careful and manageable way to improve the budget bottom line. Unfortunately for the government, and for Joe Hockey in particular, the budget deficit has gotten much worse under his watch. He said he would make it better. He's made it much worse. And we've got this chaos and confusion in the economic commentary and the budget commentary from the government. Just yesterday, for example, Kieran, we had the Prime Minister stand up in a speech in Australia saying that he expected that the fall in the iron ore price would have big implications for the budget. In exactly the same day, the Treasurer in the United States said that he didn't expect there to be a big impact on the budget. And that's just one of many examples of how the chaos and confusion in economic policy on the Liberal side of the Parliament is smashing consumer confidence, which is down 10% since the election. That's flowing through to the unemployment rate, which is higher now, unbelievably, is higher now in Australia than it was during the depths of the global financial crisis. And the government has a lot to answer for when it comes to the way that their confusion and their chaos is damaging the economy.
Well, Kelly, you can respond to a bit of that. And also, I guess, another point I want to put to you in terms of confusion, I guess, it relates to the tax rate, the corporate tax rate, having a two-tiered system. In your view, is that sustainable?
Well, first, let me just quickly respond to a couple of the points that Jim raised. I mean, he talks about rating agencies and being able to achieve AAA credit ratings. Well, let me say, it was under the Labor Party in 1986 and 1989 that we received downgrades from Standard & Poor's and Moody's for our AAA credit rating, and we received those downgradings a number of times down to AA, and it was only under the previous Howard Costello government that we achieved those rating agencies back to AAA. Now, he's talking about Fitch, which is one rating agency, but all the hard work was done during the Howard Costello years where the budget was repaired. We're undergoing that same repair job. We're being obstructed in doing that right now, but that is not going to dissuade us from the very serious task at hand. When it comes to tax, obviously, we're a government that wants lower, simpler and fairer taxes. We have a record as a Liberal government of cutting taxes already. We've cut the carbon tax, we've cut the mining tax. Your former boss doesn't agree with you, though? And your former boss, Peter Costello, thinks you're not doing much of a job. Morbid jokes, the way he called it. Well, we've got, when I talk about the Liberal record, I'm talking about his record too at cutting taxes, both company and personal income taxes. And we have embarked upon that by at first cutting the carbon tax, the mining tax, and now we've announced a company tax cut for small business. But that's not going to be the end of it. That's the whole reason we have brought about the tax white paper, to be able to discuss how it is we can make our tax system more efficient, more fair, and how we can actually cut taxes further to increase growth and productivity.
We've got to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Kelly O'Dwyer and Jim Chalmers.
At SEW Eurodrive, we're all about solutions. From geared motors to heavy industrial gears, simple frequency inverters through to sophisticated decentralised technology or servo controls. SEW can tailor a package to suit your requirements. German technology, Australian know-how, local assembly, sales and service. SEW has the drive to keep you up and running.
SEW Eurodrive. At Escape Travel, our holiday experts would like to welcome you aboard the biggest and most modern megaliners in Australia with an amazing offer. Book now and you can be cruising from only $120 per night. Plus you'll receive a bonus US $75 on-board credit per cabin. Now is the perfect time to discover the ultimate cruise experience with Royal Caribbean. Talk to a holiday expert today at one of our 165 stores nationally on 1300 Holiday.
That's my husband Tony. He's just discovered Uncle Toby's oats are a natural source of protein and that they're a superfood.
Did you know that Uncle Toby's oats with milk are naturally rich in protein, which helps build muscles, and they're a superfood? You can tell I eat them every day.
So modest.
Uncle Toby's Oats, the naturally rich in protein superfood that's news to some.
I worked hard to retire early, but I didn't want my brain to retire too. I mean, I stay active, but it's just not the same. Lumosity is real science disguised as games, so I enjoy doing it. It's a fun part of my day. My brain feels as good as ever, and it's way better than work.
Any brain can get better, and Lumosity.com can help. It's like a personal trainer for your brain, improving your performance with the science of neuroplasticity, but in a way that just feels like games. Start training with Lumosity.com right now and discover what your brain can do.
They told me to get a real job. It doesn't get more real than this.
Only at The Good Guys. Update your kitchen today. Purchase a selected oven to claim a bonus Le Creuset cast iron casserole valued at $429. Available in-store and online. Only at The Good Guys.
They fought, they fell, they helped define a nation. Saturday, April 25, Sky News Live presents direct and uninterrupted every major service and event, marking our 100th Anzac Day. From New Zealand and around Australia, from the Gallipoli shoreline, join us as we remember and honour the courage and sacrifice, all who've served, all who've fallen, in war and for peace over the last 100 years. This Anzac Day on Sky News Live.
This is AM Agenda. With me this morning, Parliamentary Secretary to the Treasurer, Kelly O'Dwyer, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Opposition Leader, Jim Chalmers. Kelly, to you on Peter Hendy's comments. He's the member for Eden Monero. He's also a former head of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry. He says that the government should stop indicating that it might be open to a rise in the GST. Rather, he's advocating that the states have reinstated their powers to take income tax, to have their own revenue stream in return for reduced federal taxes. What do you say to this? Because this is obviously something that we haven't seen for many, many decades in Australia, state income taxes.
Well, look, Peter Hendy is somebody who I respect enormously and comes with a wealth of knowledge and experience to this debate as somebody who has participated in the tax debate over many, many years. He's got a view on this issue which he is putting forward to be part of the tax consideration and also the Federation white paper, because what he is proposing will obviously be a reasonably significant change to the way that tax operates. Now, we haven't ruled anything in or out. That's an issue for people to assess. What is clear, though, is that states are very, very good, on the one hand, at pointing the finger or putting the hand out to ask for more money, and truthfully, they have a lot of powers presently to raise their own revenue in a whole variety of different ways. The question has to be asked, are states always making the best decisions about how they spend that money? And we've seen the perfect example in the state of Victoria, where $1 billion is basically going to be down the drain as a result of the political and ideological decision of the Andrews government to not listen to the hundreds of thousands of Victorians who want the East-West roadway project built.
Now, Jim, given the Labor Party so vehemently opposed to an increase in the consumption tax, does this idea make sense, that the states be returned these powers to have to take income tax, which they gave up back in World War II?
Well, Kieran, you're absolutely correct to say that we won't support an increase to the GST or the broadening of the base. We've said that repeatedly, but we are up for a conversation about tax reform in other areas. The primary reason, or one of the absolute key reasons why state budgets are under so much pressure now, is because the Abbott government in the last hockey budget cut $80 billion over 10 years out of schools and hospitals right around the country. In my home state of Queensland, as the Health Minister Cameron Dick has pointed out today, that means $11 billion cut out of Queensland hospitals alone. And that's the main reason why state budgets are... That's the main reason why state budgets are under so much pressure. We are up for a conversation about tax reform across other areas. We've put forward some very constructive proposals around tax on multinational companies that arrange their debt and arrange their profits in such a way as to avoid tax. That proposal is on the table. It's been worked up with experts from around the country and around the world. And we've said to the Abbott government that if they wanted to take that $7.2 billion in revenue over the next 10 years, which would help alleviate some of the pressures on the budget, then we would pass that through the Parliament.
So you're not opposed in principle to this idea, Jim, before I go back to Kelly?
We've just made it clear about what parts of that tax discussion paper, which were released by the Treasurer a couple of weeks ago, that we're not interested in. That's principally the GST rate. But we've said over and over again, whether it be Bill Shorten or Chris Bowen or Andy Lee or others, that we're up for a conversation about tax reform more broadly.
All right, Kelly O'Dwyer, you wanted to interject there.
I just want to very quickly respond to just one point that Jim raised in relation to the cutting of hospital funding. Over the forward estimate period, over the next 4 years, we're actually increasing hospitals funding. 9% this year, 9% next year, 9% the year after, and 6% the year after that. So it's
in your own budget
papers,
Kelly. You still haven't had a look at your own budget.
However, the point I would also make is he talks about an $11 billion cut in Queensland. Well, let me say this. We are spending $1 billion every month on interest payments alone on the debt that has been borrowed by the previous Labor government. Now, if we can get our budget back under control, think of how that money can be better spent.
Okay, finally, this idea of deregulating the car market, Kelly O'Dwyer, your thoughts? We're almost out of time, but just quickly your thoughts on this. The government considering it, allowing consumers, everyday Australians, to buy their cars from overseas dealers. And what do you make of this?
Look, the government's consulting on this issue. This is obviously a proposal that has been brought forward. We're interested in people's views on this. We believe that it's important to have competition in the marketplace, and anything that can reduce the cost to consumers is obviously something that we think would be very welcome.
Jim Chalmers, your thoughts?
Yeah, my neighbour's got a car yard in my electorate. He thinks it's a good idea. We'll balance a whole range of ideas, a bit like the government. We'll work through all of the 50 recommendations of the Harper Review into competition with an eye to the best outcome for consumers, whether it be on this issue about cars or across the board.
It seems to make sense given the manufacturing industry is going to be pretty much shut down within a couple of years, Jim Chalmers, to allow Australians to have access to the best quality cars at the lowest price.
Well, that's right. I mean, we want people to access the best cars they can at the cheapest price. That's absolutely true, so long as they comply with Australian standards and all of that. But the point of having a Harper Review like this and discussing and properly and methodically working through the 50 recommendations is to balance all of the views on all sides of the argument first before we come to a view.
Okay, all right. Kelly O'Dwyer, thanks so much for your time this morning, and Jim Chalmers as well.
Pleasure.
Thank you, and a good choice on the pink tie, Jim, as well. I endorse it. That's all we've got time for this morning on AIM Agenda. We'll see you those two soon in the next couple of weeks. In the meantime, a quick break, back in just a moment.